Hello again. This is Stan back with a special international, that's right, international, interesting idea, but it begins right here in the United States. And those of you who do not know that this Saturday, this weekend is celebrated throughout many parts of the United States, particularly in the western part of our world, and it is National Day of the Cowboy. And you need to know about that and perhaps need to know more about cowboys and the Western traditions. And so that's an interesting idea. So I brought two very interesting people alongside who have their own podcast, which I am the privileged producer of. And it's called The Marshal and the Madam. And you know what? It's one of the nicest, best, even well-produced, but even better staffed and announced by people who know all about the Western tradition. So step forward, Sherry, put your boots on, Marshall, put your hat on, and introduce yourself, and then tell us about the National Day of the Cowboy.
Well, take it away, Sherry.
Oh, okay. Ladies first. I like that. You're such a gentleman. You're such a cowboy.
Oh, yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. My name's Sherry Monahan, and I am an author, marketer, food stylist, everything about the American West. I love to write about regular people, daily lives, all kinds of fun stuff, and recently started my podcast called The Marshal and the Madam, as Stan mentioned, with Marshall, and we do it every week. We have a lot of fun, and we talk about all types of different subjects on the frontier for people to learn about. And I will let Marshall do his introduction, and then I was going to talk to you guys about what a cowboy was. So go ahead, Marshall. Tell everybody about you.
All right. Okay. About me or about cowboys?
About you. You're supposed to do an introduction on who you are.
Oh, okay. Well, I've written a few books, and every one of them has something to do with cowboys and the West and the spirit of the West and what the West means to not just the West, but to America and to the whole world.
That's true. And we'll tell them your most important role, and that is you are the Arizona
the Arizona State historian. Yeah,
that's right. Don't be shy.
Arizona State historian.
Nice title. Yeah.
Yeah. So. But
Marshall
anyway,
is the guy.
Well,
he's the Arizona guy.
Okay, and you introduce yourself then, and then I'll pick up.
This is an interesting idea. We should learn how to play better. No, I did introduce myself already, just, what I did and what I write. But I wanted to, for those of you who, maybe in a different country or, from the East Coast, we all have heard the word cowboy. And it has that iconic image of a man on a horse. And when I was doing research for my cowboy cookbook, I wanted to know more about that term. And so, cowboys really had different meanings in the very beginning. And I found in 1869, it was really interesting. In Kansas, the Leavenworth Bulletin newspaper had a statement, and it was this is their quote: "The Atchison Champion and Press flies at the Bulletin in a terrible rage with the manners of a cowboy," with a hyphenated. Mm-hmm. And so it was very interesting. That was almost a derogatory term. The term really didn't appear in any dictionary until Webster's put it in their complete dictionary in 1884. The entry did not describe the Western cowboy that we know today. It actually referred to a marauder from the Revolutionary War era. But of course, that soon changed, and cowboy came to describe someone who worked with or watched cattle. By 1895, though, the cattle drives were over, and the new definition for a cowboy appeared in the Webster's dictionary, and it was defined as a cattle herder or a drover. And then later in the early 1900s, they expanded the definition to say a cattle herder, especially one of a class of mounted herdsmen of the western states.
That's better. I like that better.
That was better, right? They got better as it went along, and the cowboy persona, I think, started to be romanticized and really gave it a true definition. So I thought that was kind of an interesting evolution of the actual term cowboy. And one final note on that.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to say one final note on if anybody has known anybody that writes really nonfiction, wonderful stuff. There's a man who I love. It's Robert Utley, and he's written so many award-winning books, very noted historian. In his book, in the Encyclopedia of the American West, this is how he described it, the cowboy. He said, "No figure more vividly personifies the Old West than the plainsman who tended cattle during the heyday of the open range. I don't think anybody could say it better than that.
Well, I've got Marshall Trimble's description of the cowboy.
That should be good.
His job description. Cowboys is noisy fellows with bow legs and brass stomachs that works from the hurricane deck of a U-neck cow pony, and it hates any kind of work that can't be done from a top one. They rides like Comanches and ropes like Mexicans and shoots like Texas Rangers. And they can spit 10 foot into a stiff wind, whoop the weight in wildcats, fight grizzlies bare knuckle, and rides anything that wears hair. They lives in and loves the outdoors, hates fences, and respects rivers, while you throw him into a river and he'll naturally float upstream. The only way to get rid of one of them is to cut off his head and bury it someplace where he can't find it. That's for me when I'm on stage.
I love that. You should put that to music. That's pretty entertaining.
Oh.
No,
but go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I
was going to say sure. It's heroes, and I've told audiences this so many times. People need heroes, and if they don't have them, they make them up. I'm talking about not just Americans, but around the world. People have to have folk heroes. And the Old West didn't have that problem, as they had an abundance of the real deal. The unique American West had included mountain men, gold prospectors, soldiers, buffalo hunters, outlaws, and plainsmen. But the cowboy stood head and shoulders above all the rest. And a lot of it had to do with the horse. And if it wasn't the cow, it wasn't the cow now that made the cowboy. It was the horse. And there's been a period in American history that has been as colorful as that. There's never been a period in history as colorful as that, as the open range cowboy. And they represent those ideals that Americans love and respect. And that's including independence, self-reliance, honesty, resourcefulness, physical strength, dauntless courage, and pride in their jobs. And the Old West will never die because we won't let it die.
Amen to that, brother.
So, yeah, that's...
It's true. The other things that I think about when I think of a cowboy is someone who has honor. That their word is their bond. A handshake is all you need. They're steadfast. You can rely on, and their values. What you just said and what I said, and when people think about, more and more people are, I believe I've seen this trend, Stan and I have talked about it before, where you're starting to see more and more people wanting to go back to that simpler way of life, being the cowboy way, the Western way. I think, Stan, what is your favorite saying you like to say?
Well, what I would like to say is that we're not only here to save Western traditions, but probably even Western civilization.
The Western way, exactly.
Right, the Western way.
Yep.
Well, there was a code of the West, and it wasn't written down. Tom Mix had one, Gene Autry had one, the Lone Ranger had one, Hopalong Cassidy had his code of the West, and Roy Rogers. They all had a code or creed, and the best part, it was aimed at youngsters. And I was born in 1939, so I grew up in the heyday of those singing cowboys, as silly as they may have dressed. And if they'd worn one of those flowered shirts in my hometown, they would have lynched them. But they did. They had a message, and it was a code or a creed that was aimed at youngsters and emphasized hard work, self-reliance, independence, honesty, resourcefulness, physical strength, dauntless courage, and a good work ethic. And in short, it was a moral compass to be the best you can. And that was the cowboy, the singing cowboy. That was their contribution. And we, as kids, and I was part of that generation, we grew up believing that. I actually believe that if you broke the law, even if it was a perfect crime, somebody was going to catch you. And just don't do it. But Ramon Adams, the Western linguist, has a really good book or two out there. And in his 1969 book, The Cowboy and His Code of Ethics, he wrote, back in the days, when the cowman and his herds made a new frontier, there was no law on the range. There was a lack of written law, and it made it necessary for them to frame some kind of their own, thus developing a rule of behavior which became the Code of the West. It wasn't probably called Code of the West, but these were homespun laws, being merely gentlemen's agreements to certain rules of conduct for survival. You know, your neighbor's cows are mixing in with yours, and you got to separate them. Don't put your neighbor's cow under your branding iron or anything like that. And those kinds of codes, they were just unwritten. They were never written into stances, but respected at the time by everyone on the range. Yep. And that's a good definition of the real Code of the West. It was just a gentleman's agreement.
Yeah, exactly. And that's so true. I mean, and I think, you know, when people think about the cowboy, you know, you have as I said before, the iconic guy, the guy in the cowboy hat, his boots, on his horse, you know, riding off into the sunset, you know, the Clint Eastwood movies, you know, that's what I think of, you know, as a cowboy. But, you know, he's like the gunfighter cowboy image. He kind of like has this crossover. You have this, he's a good guy, but he can still be a bad guy. He does bad things, you know. So the cowboy is a wide range of images too. I mean, you have the one on the cattle drive, you have, like I said, the Clint Eastwood, then you have the bad cowboys that, you know, did cattle rustling. But for the most part, I believe that because everybody still wants to believe in the good in everybody, I think deep down we all have that in us, is that we focus on the good cowboy, the good guy. You know, he's the one that comes in and saves the day. And who doesn't want, you know, a cowboy, especially a woman, who doesn't want that tall, handsome cowboy in his boots and hat and duster jacket to come ride into town and save the day, the damsel in distress, right?
That's right. That's right. And those were good things, and those were good values. Oh, by the way, you were defining the cowboy in the public or the newspaper, the press image, and there's one other that you didn't mention, and that is the cowboy with a capital C and a hyphenated boy at the end in Cochise County in the 1880s, and those were the cattle rustlers. They were terrorists. They're just frontier terrorists. Going across the Mexican border.
Curly Bill, right? And
Curly Bill, Johnny Ringo, and all that bunch. And they were a real threat. They were an international threat. Mexico was leaning on the United States government to punish those boys, bring them in, and they're raiding across the border, and the Tombstone was terrorized. Cochise County was being terrorized, and in this term, cowboy was a derogatory word.
Oh yeah, yep, for sure. It's interesting though when you think about, you know, when he was in his heyday, you know, he was living the dream. Most of them were solitary. You know, they just would go from place to place. The ones that were on the cattle, of course, they were with other cowboys at the time, but pretty much they all stuck to themselves, but they had each other's back when they needed to. I think there was a camaraderie around cowboys as well, even though they were loners per se in their relationships and what they did and kept their nose out of everybody else's business. There was still that camaraderie.
Yeah, and there was a term that they used for that, and it was called riding for the brand. So it means the ranch you work for. It's like being in the Marine Corps or something, like some elite force of modern day special ops and things like that. You develop a loyalty to that group, and that is that ranch, and you would really be shunning yourself, I think, to your peers if you ever broke that code. In other words, I guess to be perfectly honest, in the real West, they did, because a lot of ranches started by stealing a start. You stole a few cows from your boss and got your own brand and put your brand on them and started a ranch that way. And I have to say, many of the famous ranchers in the West actually got their start that way. But still, there was a code there. There was an honor code there that they still had. And I've written stories about modern day cowboys, and there is that loyalty. And
there is, and I think the new series that Kevin Costner has out, not new anymore, but the series, the Yellowstone series, you know, they do a really good job of that code and that support, and that it's actually called. I've heard characters that use the line "riding for the brand," and so you can see that in modern cowboys, like you were just talking about. That's something that's carried over, I think, through the generations of cowboys, even to the modern day cowboy.
Yeah, and it's still a good job. It pays a lot better than it used to, but it still doesn't pay. You'll never get rich being a cowboy. But I know a lot of the ones I interviewed in modern times, that are working cowboys, and that means they make their living on a ranch, and they love the independence, the open spaces they ride, and just that independent nature of the whole job is something that they wouldn't fit anywhere else.
Well, there's that. I mean, you as a musician should know this. I'm sure this is familiar. You know, there's a lot of songs written about or for or by cowboys. Like the one is "Don't Fence Me In." You know, I mean, that's pretty much the cowboy saying, don't fence me in. It's got a lot of different meanings, but I'm sure you can probably think of other songs that are about the cowboy that talks about honor and being lonely, or, on the range or something like that. Home on the range. I mean,
just the life of the cowboy. Yeah.
Yep. I mean, it's personified in music all the time. Which is pretty cool too. So I mean, the whole cowboy image isn't just an image and honor, but it affects so many things, as far as music and movies and the way people live and how we all function today.
Yeah, and I alluded to something a while ago, and I really didn't dwell on it very long, but it was the horse. It was the horse that made the cowboy. And there's something that goes all the way back to medieval times about being on a horse makes a person feel bigger and superior, and in fact, the United States government in the early days of the Republic did not have a horse cavalry because it was reminiscent of the days in Europe when the cavalry, the horsemen, were run roughshod over the poor peasants that were afoot. And nobody would herd cattle afoot and call themselves a cowboy. But this eliteness of a man on horseback, or a woman for that matter, and it was something that it was just, you just felt bigger than life, and you had freedom of movement. It was like the first time one of us got a driver's license when we were 16 and put a key in the ignition and drove a car down the highway all by ourselves. We felt that freedom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's interesting, I being, from the East Coast, I rode horses when I was younger. We didn't have horses on a farm or anything like that, but I would go horseback riding. And I've done it as recently as a couple of years ago out in Tucson, and it's really, for me as a person, to get on a horse and being one with the animal. I love animals, but to be on that horse, you're up higher and you get to see things from a different perspective of walking on the ground, and you have to have trust in that. The animal has to trust you. So there is a real connection between a cowboy or anybody on the back of a horse, riding that horse, guiding you, knowing that it is your means of transportation. It's your companion. I would imagine that many a cowboy stories that, they like their horse was like their best friend because they were with each other through thick and thin,
Yep. And there's the stories of a man, a cowboy, and his horse. The only time I ever saw my brother cry was when his horse died.
Oh, so even grown men cry.
He'd had that horse about 30 years, and
wow. I liked your statement though. It's not the cows and the cattle that made the cowboy. It was the horse, because you think of cowboy, that was what their job was, right? Their job was being dealing with cattle, but they were actually on the horse, and that was part of their job.
It was all about being on the horse.
Yeah, could you imagine a guy in a cowboy hat and boots and sitting on a cow? Boy, isn't that sexy image?
Well, even to Americans, when in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and post-Civil War years, all the way up to the turn of the 20th century, You have you have a two or three cowboys ride into a town and rob a bank, and there they were, boots and spurs and big cowboy hat and six guns and on a horse, and then thundering out of town with the loot like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And you put that back in Brooklyn, and you have Abe Saperstein riding in on his bicycle to rob a bank. And it just
not quite the same iconic image, is it?
Doesn't have the same. It loses something somewhere.
It loses something in the translation.
Yeah.
Stan, did you want to chime in or have any questions for us? We've been rattling on here.
I've just enjoyed the stories, and more, I think what I really want to mention is that, in effect, it is people like you, and we are trying to make sure that our new What It Takes radio, that we can really feature the people who write and speak and love the cowboy. They love the horse. They love the Western tradition. And so I'm glad to be not only just a radio guy, but I get to be a listener and a learner. And I have learned more things by just listening to you people tell me stories about the West. It has more than lived up to my wonderful aspiration. Hey, you'll learn more here by accident than most places by design, and you people make that happen, and you did it again today, and I thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I was active with the National Day of the Cowboy when it was made an official holiday here in Arizona. It was so many years ago, tell you the truth, I'd pretty much forgotten about it. We just did it because it was the right thing to do. But I see now we've got, say, 14 states. Yeah, 14 states recognize National Day of the Cowboy. It'll probably never be universal because, some of those places back east probably think this doesn't fit us, but getting them to vote for anything, but like the National Day of the Cowboy. But I would like to see all 50 states make that a holiday.
Well, we'll just have to work on that. Don't underestimate my eastern buddies out here now.
We only have 36 states to go.
We don't have far to go. There's a lot of people here in North Carolina and in the South and all over that love, in the Midwest, that absolutely love horses, and I guarantee that just because somebody in Ohio or in Pennsylvania is, they're on a horse, they probably have a hat of some sort and some boots. So, you know what? They're cowboys too.
Yeah.
Everybody out in the West, everybody in the East Coast is going, what the hell is she talking about?
Well, that reminds me of a feature, and I think it was actually maybe partly in True West magazine or one of maybe Cowboys and Indians. There is this very strong, as she would say, seasoned and mature woman, and she simply says, I'm a cowboy. And of course, people back, what do you mean you're a cowboy? And she says, you have to remember, cowboy is not a gender, it's a state of mind.
I like that.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, it is. It is. It really is. And we all feel a little better when we're on a horse. I've ridden all over Arizona, working trail rides, sitting on the hurricane deck of a horse, and
I've done it in Ireland. I mean, it's just, you want to talk about a crazy horseback ride adventure is go to Ireland, man. Whew, those people know their horses, and it was, I had a blast when we were out there. Their horses are beautiful and majestic. The countryside is fantastic. And yeah, I made a mistake of, my guide and I were too busy chit-chatting, and she had told everybody before we went on the horseback ride, don't ever let your horses get nose to nose. And I had this big old Canon camera strapped around my neck back in the day when you had to have a big camera, and our horses went nose to nose, and they took off like it was a day at the race. Needless to say, I was black and blue from my camera. But again, even in Ireland, you can feel like that state of cowboy racing a horse. Stan, have we given you enough information for cowboys and cowgirls and anybody who wants to learn about them?
You did just beautifully, and I want to thank you so very, very much. And please tell people about your program and how they can reach out to you. And then you just kind of, tell us to, happy trails to you. Just kind of finish it that way, okay?
All right, I will. You want me to do that, Marshall?
Sure.
All right. And I just want to let you guys know, if you're interested in learning more about the American frontier, please tune in to the Marshall and the Madam podcast. We do one once a week, and we try to entertain you as best as we can. I don't think you'll be disappointed. And we usually talk about some type of a food or beverage, or I usually give a recipe in our show notes. And you can check out our website information in the show notes for Marshall and the Madam. We'd love for you to come along for the ride. And until then, happy trails.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling until then. Who cares about the clouds when we're together? Just sing a song and bring the sunny weather.